always in one box. It has all their names on it.
If you don't mind. Welcome to the Audit Committee on Friday, January 24th, 2020. First order of business is to approve the meeting minutes. Would anybody like to make a motion, or is there a discussion?
I make a motion to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Please vote. We vote by these?
Yes.
Okay. All right, that brings us to public comment. Is anybody here for public comment today? I think Clive, you put in a request, but I don't see him.
I think he ran upstairs.
When he comes back, we will move him to the next agenda when he comes in. All right, that brings us to our Executive Director's report. Mr. Executive Director.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, or good afternoon, actually. Good afternoon to all of you. Quite a few things that are exciting and important to update you on. I traveled yesterday to Washington, D.C. With Mayor Faulkner, and we signed an exclusivity agreement with the United States Navy, with the new Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Modly, which is very significant. He invited us to his office to sign the agreement. In a nutshell, that agreement said the Navy is now exclusively negotiating with Sandag and other entity to do this, to develop this site. As I told the reporter, it's an exciting day for the region, for the nation, for the state. And I believe this agreement now set the motion for a term sheet that, if the board approved in March, will set up the parameters for us moving forward in our work. It's very exciting for me personally, in 8 months to go from an idea to signing an MOU with the United States Navy with 2 secretaries now. The last secretary is just Spencer. I was talking to the assistant secretary. He said, by the time we cut the ground, you're probably going to be signing this 5-6 times with the hopefully not. But I will tell you that when the new secretary invited me and Mayor Faulkner to his office and we chatted with him, he really very positive about the future of the Navy in San Diego. And he's very positive about linking transportation and economic development. So exciting, exciting development. I have, we'll have copy if you want the MOU, this 5-page copy. This is the original copy. I'll pass it around. We have copies if you want it.
Don't mess this up.
Earlier today at the board meeting, where there were questions about whether I had the authority to sign on behalf of the board, and based on what our chief counsel indicated, yes, I do. I signed this under policy 17. Consistent with the approved budget by the board. I think it's fair to say that we're right now at the stage where we need to commit the agency to significant resources come March and April. I want to thank the Navy folks. Joe Stuyvesant and his team are amazing. Just so you know, we have started the environmental work. We believe that this will be the first time in history we will do a ROD for NEPA record decision in 1 year. Whether that's going to be the case or not, that's what we're striving for. I'm also happy to report that Senator Atkin, the President Pro Tem, agreed to run a bill for us. That bill is about CEQA streamlining, not CEQA exemption, but streamlining for this development. That's significant too. That didn't happen. Happened a couple of times in California's history where the President Pro Tem actually runs a bill. Ron Steinberg did it in Sacramento, and President Pro Tem Atkin agreed to run the bill for us. He's still drafting as we speak. And that's very significant. Last week we had a first of a statewide working group to Los Angeles. Secretary David Kim came here, hosted the meeting, This is all about the Del Mar Bluff, the short and long-term fixes for the bluff. And hopefully, this time we'll be serious about what we need to do to make sure this is done. And finally, the 5 big moves, the regional transportation plan is moving as planned. End of March, we will be doing an unveil of the 5 big moves with a lot more detail than the board saw back in April. So that's, Mr. Chairman, conclude my report. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Just a quick question, and forgive me for not being kind of naive.
No,
The MOU talks about Navy Point, Loma Bay's Old Town campus. Is that where their Star Wars, is that?
yeah. Can somebody bring me the 3D model there? Kim, can you bring me the 3D model in my conference room of this power? Yes, that's the 72 acres that the Navy owns, and the idea is to take about 20 acres and build a transportation hub model after the New York Grand Central, which goes 50 feet down. People move underground to the airport, then second, third floor, and then the surface will be used for development. The Navy building, that has to go first, which they identified about 1 million square foot of office space. And they agreed that the warehousing for their needs could go off-site. And then finally, the development, the private development. So we're gonna do a P3, put it out there. Hopefully the land have enough value to capture what the cost of the Navy is. But the good news is we are gonna use what's called increment financing tax credits that the state have already as law. So give the developer some guarantees for putting that building early on. But yeah, it's the 72 acres. Having said that, and I'll show you in a second on the map. You all know where it is, right? You're seeing the warehouse. It's right now has close to 6,000 employees working in that warehouse. And here is what the secretary told us. He said, this is actually the place where they're defending the nation from cybersecurity. That's that warehouse. No air conditioning in the summer. When it rains, it drops in some places. And the Navy is absolutely have a need that's not satisfied now. But if you look at the area around the 72 acres, you know, there's a post office, a county health building, abandoned in some cases. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. No.
So that's actually this. So in relation, this is the 5 freeway, okay, and this is Pacific. So this is the two sites that are 77 acres. The Navy building is going to go here, part of that. This is the transportation hub, and the rest is development. But if you think about it, here is the sport arena. All the way from here, the midway, all the way, this is like in the city plans, there's nothing really here.
Right.
So you could say this is going to be probably the biggest transformation for San Diego ever. Talking about 2,000 acres from the sport arena, where you make like Rosecrans becomes a big boulevard to go through. So that's the site we're talking about with the Navy. This and this. Yeah. By the way, people say when they see this, they say, this is going to block people's view, right? Not so. Because in engineering, you look at the picture like this, right? And here it looks like that. Actually, nobody's going to be blocked, even though this have no height limit. This is like, what, 30 stories, I think?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's...
Thank you. What's, kind of our purview, but just, do you know what's going to happen to the sports arena? It's a pretty old building, right?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty much part of the thinking. What do we do for this whole area?
So they'll probably redevelop that area?
Absolutely, no question about it. And It's already, this area is zoned by the city of San Diego for redevelopment anyway. It's just simply this bring an opportunity to look at it more closely. And actually it's beneficial to the project because the Navy's requirement, 1 million square foot, is about somewhere between 100 million and $1 billion. In case that land does not bring that value, if you include a potential redevelopment of the sport arena and other stuff, you could do.
Do you think you'll have trouble with the coastal commission?
Say that again?
Do you think you'll have much trouble with the coastal commission?
No, the 72 acre don't fall under the coastal
Good.
commission.
Oh, okay, good.
But I'll tell you, I made a joke at the last week, the coastal commission was present, and I said, they're actually normal people. I know the executive director, I just met him 3 months ago, and him and I have such a connection we didn't know about. But I heard his brother when I was at SCAG, so I have a nice way. No, I don't think we're going to have a problem with the coastal commission, but we're going to have a requirement. In the Navy property itself, I don't think they will be involved at all. Yes, sir.
So, two somewhat unrelated questions, but the first, on this project, what's the term of the exclusivity with the Navy?
The term, the Navy, if you recall, in the beginning they put RFI, request for information. So they ask people if they bid for the project. Exclusivity now said the Navy has to close that and negotiate it with Sandag on the transfer of the land. And the two aspects of the transfer of the land, if we guarantee them their needs, they could lease the land for 99 years, they could actually give us the deed for the land, so that kind of.
So there's no time limit on the term for the exclusive negotiation?
There will be a
right?
time limit when we do it in by March 31st.
Got it. Okay.
Yes,
Got
but
it.
there will be a limit.
And then the second thing is totally unrelated, and tell me if we should address this some other time, but you know, I apologize, I meant to listen in, but I didn't have time to listen in to the board meeting this morning, but I noticed on the agenda that there was some reference to a creation of something that I don't recall, of strategic
Subcommittee.
planning of subcommittee was formed. Does that have any implication for the 5 big moves, you know, in terms of strategic?
This was, and Laura could jump in here. So we have, as you know, we had a strategic planning discussion been going on since so when I started last year. And the strategic planning work is almost concluded by defining what's the vision and mission and values of the agency. And
Oh, this is more related to the internal
no,
structure?
but they made it that plus the performance agreement and evaluation of me.
Oh,
And the proposal on the table was to create a subcommittee. The counter proposal was to have the executive committee be that subcommittee. And the executive committee now is that subcommittee. Didn't change anything on the 5 big moves.
okay, so, oh, got it.
After an hour of discussion, just saying.
Okay. Thanks, Hassan. I appreciate you coming down, of course.
I'll be here listening to you. I'm going to see you at work here.
Okay. Well, that was just a discussion item. We have another discussion item, update on the Office of Independent Performance Auditor activities. And Mary Kay will give us that.
Thank you.
Oh,
Good afternoon.
Mary Kay, that's a good point. Hi.
Hi, where's he now?
Before you start, I want to let we skipped public comment.
Oh, okay.
You can start with Catherine.
Yeah, Catherine? Catherine, come on up, and then we'll get Clive. Sorry, Mary Kay.
Oh, no, go ahead, it's fine. I'm not in any hurry.
Thank you, Clive.
Hi, Catherine Rhodes, and I'm glad that you guys have an audit committee. You know, I went to the Department of Transportation before because I had a whole bunch of different issues with Sandag, and that this audit committee, I think, came from that, where you're supposed to have a way for the public to come to you with their questions, and for you guys to work together and then come up with your report, your audit report. But, you know, one of the things that I did is, you know, I did my complaint, which was great, and then you guys did your research, which was fabulous. But then you never came back to me to tell me anything that was going on. I thought you were just collecting the evidence and then you would contact me and then we could have a discussion of this so I could, you know, give you my viewpoints of why what your staff said or what your staff keeps on saying is not exactly correct according to my view. But instead, you guys wrote a report and basically said all my issues are closed. You know, my one big issue is the grandfathered airport revenue, would give you guys at Sandag so much money for regional transportation projects. You know, one of the grandfathered issues is, you know, we have grandfathers because status because we're on state tidelands, and there's only two ways to get rid of grandfather status according to the law. So one way is to ask for it to be removed, which nobody asked for. Even Steve Peace that wrote the legislation never asked for the grandfather status to be removed. The second one is if you privatize the airport, and that was never, that never happened. And so I believe the grandfather status still applies, and the only solution that I asked you guys to go to, you know, I didn't ask you guys to go talk to the FAA again and get the same information I already know. What I asked you guys to do is to go to the State Lands Commission and specifically ask for a legal opinion. But that didn't happen, and in your report you don't write down that, you know, we decided not to talk to the State Lands Commission and ask for a legal opinion. So I would like my complaint to be reopened, and when these do, you know, these letters do come to you, that these reply letters actually maybe be put online so different people can see, you know, what the complaints were and what your reply was to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Clive?
I'll take that turn now. Thank you.
Welcome.
Vice Chair, members of the Audit Committee, Clive Richards. First I want to say Happy New Year to you all. And then I want to mention that what I'm hoping for is that this year will be a very productive year. I look forward to that. I will look forward to reading all those audit reports. That's one of my favorite things to do, actually. My friends say, shake their head when I tell them I'm reading audit reports. But that, I do hope that this year will be a very productive one. And I'll be trying to attend as many meetings as I can. Unfortunately, there's so many things going on in the region, in the state, and the nation, that it takes a little bit more time than I think I have. There's only 24 hours in a day, and I try to sleep some of those hours. But I appreciate all of you being here, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. All right, Mary Kay, you're up.
So just wanted to introduce some staff that I have finally onboarded, which I'm excited about. We have Lloyd, who is the Principal Management Internal Auditor, started January 2nd. And I'll allow them. I've got 2 interns back here also that started around that same time. So I'm going to just give them a few minutes to introduce themselves, and maybe if we can introduce ourselves to them as well, and let them share a little bit, a few minutes about themselves. You guys want to come up to the...
Start first.
Hi, I'm Mike Ryan. I just finished my grad degree at San Diego State this past December. My focus was in economics, and this is my first foray into auditing at all. I was told by Mary she wanted me because I had experience in data analysis through my degree, and I'm hoping to learn the accounting parts of this along the way. And at least these first 3 weeks I've been here, I've kind of been, I think this is something I would like to do.
Great.
Vice Chair, members of the Audit Committee, my name is Ron Long, and as Mary mentioned, I'm an intern for the Internal Audit Department. Just this past December, I graduated from San Diego State University with a bachelor's in accounting. Before that, I was assistant for the accounting department at a hardwood flooring company, and I served as VP of Finance and Treasurer for student organizations at SDSU. sort of my 5-year plan involves 2 parts. Within the first 2 or 3 years, I hope to be, an expert in the field of internal audit here at Sandag. I really want to immerse myself in the position, learn everything I can, and understand areas of improvement that could be helped within this organization. In the 2 to 3 years after that, I hope to see myself as a key member in the internal audit department and take the knowledge that I've learned in this role and help other departments as well. Overall, my goal is to make sure that this organization is running as efficiently as possible. Thank you.
Well, welcome and thanks for coming in and doing your internship here.
Yeah, of course.
So, and the last one, my name is Lloyd Carter. I'm the new Principal Management Internal Auditor. Long name.
Very nice guy.
I have a degree in accounting. I've been auditing for going on 20 years already. I started with the Department of Alcohol and Drug Programs, where I audited all over California, auditing medical clinics receiving state and federal funding. Then I moved over to the State Controller's Office, where I audited the legislative mandates, where it allowed me to audit the school districts, community colleges, Public Defender's Office, Sheriff's Department, District Attorney's Office. So did all of that. Then decided to go to the California Gambling Control Commission, where I started auditing the tribal casinos for the special distribution funds, revenue sharing trust funds, minimum internal control standards. Did that for 6 years. And then what happened was the governor's reorg in 2013, which moved the audit section to the Department of Justice, where I now was under the Division of Law Enforcement, where we started auditing the card rooms all over California, as well as assisting the investigators, licensing for money laundering, any kind of money scheme going on. So I did that until I moved over here. Before, with that, I oversaw 4 offices in Sacramento, Riverside, San Diego, and Commerce. So this is a brand new change for me, coming down to San Diego, based out of Sacramento. So it's going to be interesting. I've seen a lot of interesting meetings already.
I'm sure they're all good, right?
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Did you we want to introduce ourselves real quick to the committee?
Bob Monson, Chief Audit Executive for the Port of San Diego, recently retired.
Congratulations.
2 weeks.
Stuart Halpern, I'm a public member of the committee, also a retired business person.
My name is Bill Wells. I'm the mayor of the city of El Cajon.
I'm signing up. I'm the executive director. Looking forward. You work for her, but we're going to be nice to you. But one thing I want you to know, so new employees have to buy lunches for everybody. I don't know how much she's paying you, but be ready.
We're on the record.
Nice meeting you.
And I'm Laura Cote, I'm the Chief Operations Officer. It's great to see you.
I'm Lynn Griffin. I'm the Deputy General Counsel supporting the Audit Committee.
So welcome. And thank you for introducing yourselves.
Of course.
To continue with my update, as you know, I've been busy with the onboarding, been setting up work plans and developing audit programs, trying to get them started. Been also trying to work with the interns to help them understand the auditing cycle and what auditing is about, hoping that they will love it as much as I do and that this will be the path that they eventually take. The risk assessment is coming along. There have been several other areas that I've been looking at that kind of deviate and redirect me at times, but it's still on focus. Still scheduled to have a report by April or May. I was invited to the ITALK meeting to talk about sort of the synergy that will go on between me and the external auditors and how we can work together to make sure that we're auditing efficiently and effectively, helping each other fill in gaps rather than overlapping. The research on staff is going on right now to increase our staff. So I'm doing a needs analysis, comparing it to other counties, MPOs, and other similar local organizations, sort of looking at the dollar oversight per auditor and trying to determine a basis for the needs of SANDAG according to the size, and kind of coming up with a happy medium. That along with the revision of the audit plan, since I've learned additional risk, identified, been able to do analysis on some of the risk assessment surveys that's come in, and just learning the organization overall. I'm going to be coming back probably in February with a revised audit plan that has some reprioritizing in it based on those risk assessments and identification of risk, along with a proposed adjustment to the 2021 budget based on that needs assessment, asking for additional staff. Today, we'll talk about it in item 5. We'll be just moving the position that was currently in internal audits that is now vacant up with the office. I will have the organizational analysis that will be completed, and I will bring that to you in February, and that really is looking at the organization for efficiencies and effectiveness and controls and making some recommendations, of which some have already been implemented. Happy to have this proactive relationship that I continue to want to have with SANDAG management, and we continue to do that. Another area that I wanted to discuss is we had prioritized as one of the higher priorities is looking at the travel around SANDAG and doing a travel review. Again, trying to be proactive. I identified the areas and the issues, and I believe that the reason for those is because of the policy. So I've had a discussion with SANDAG and encouraged them to consider following GSA federal travel policies. I've given them about 7 to choose from that have recently been updated that are within the local governments around us, and kind of given them the option to consider changing the policy, and then me coming back and looking after they implement the policy if they were willing to take that on, to determine if the policy actually corrected the issues and was working for them. And they did agree that after consideration that the GSA federal rates and the policies I provided would work for SANDAG, and that they would implement those policies, and then I would come back and audit a year or so after to see if they were actually minimizing the issues that were discovered. What I'm still waiting for is an actual date when they will implement the policy, and that is hopefully going to be worked out.
Yeah, the last of the staff was about 2 or 3 weeks. They'll put the policy in place. We'd like Mary to take a look at it before we actually implement it. So hopefully within the next couple of months, I would think it's a realistic date that we can actually have it in place.
Great. So again, I will continue to do this with SANDAG, as I think the benefit of working proactively with management to try to bring efficiencies, effectiveness, and more controls is the best way for not only SANDAG, but also for our audit resources, because they can be better used in other areas if there's a cooperative agreement and a relationship that's happening. So,
Chairman, if I may ask a question, would the policy apply to the board also?
yes, yes. And with that, it's sort of up to management. I mean, there can be 2 policies, one for employees, one for the board. But really, in speaking with a lot of the board members, they follow, because their cities and counties follow the GSA rate already, they kind of follow that policy anyway. So I don't think there should be a reason why there would be a difference in policy for the board members.
So if it is decided that the board would fall under this new policy, is this something that the board would have to weigh in on and vote on?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
there is an existing travel policy for SANDAG that applies to both the board members and employees, and it is a board policy that has been adopted by the board. So if SANDAG were to adopt a new standard or formula or guidelines, then it would go to the board for approval. SANDAG's process for any board policy revision is to go to the SANDAG Executive Committee for review and recommendation, and then with approval to the board. So that would be part of the process that would happen over the next few weeks.
What happens if, does this committee have the final say? What happens if the board says no?
The board has final authority on what policy they would adopt.
Even if it's recommended by?
Absolutely, even if it's, as far as the board goes.
Right.
So,
No, I want, that's what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
so the issues that I've identified, because I haven't looked at the travel around the board yet, the issues that have been identified have been SANDAG employees. So it's my recommendation, regardless if the board was to adopt it for themselves or not, was that SANDAG follow the policy of
I think they
GSA.
will, I'm just asking what they're.
But ultimately, and another area that I identified is, it's sort of like you have this board policy and then you have reference around travel within the employee handbook. And my recommendation was to not have both. It brings inconsistency and too much ability to misinterpret it. So really, you should have, if you're going to have a board policy that is consistent for board members and SANDAG employees that follow the GSA rates, to have one policy and in the handbook reference that policy, and that's it. So that way there's no confusion or misinterpretation or misunderstanding that would occur.
That's good. We agree totally with
I'm curious when you reference looking at other agencies on a sort of staff to dollars or dollars to staff, I can't remember what you described. Do you look at dollars inclusive of capital programs or operating?
So are we not talking about travel right now? We're going back to the
sorry,
needs?
yes, I meant in terms of your staffing.
Okay, yes,
survey.
both. So when I'm looking at the, we're taking it and doing different charts and comparisons. We're looking first at the operating budget. We're bringing then in capital improvement budget as well. And we're even looking and playing with the consulting and contracted services. So we're looking at it through different lenses and going to provide those differences in comparison. So we're looking at CIP, we're looking at operating budget, and then we're looking at it as a whole. And we're also doing some comparisons around contracted services and consulting.
And again, just for clarification, when you talk about capital improvement, there's the capital improvement in terms of, a new office building. I'm talking really more in terms of, do you look at the capital that's being spent on construction project capital? Because it just strikes me that, particularly if you're looking at other agencies, they're all going to be in different places in their
Yes.
capital program cycles.
Right.
And that if you were looking at that in a fairly just sort of narrow way, that it may actually sort of skew the result.
Well, that's why we pull it out, because we only have certain information available to us, so we can only go by what's public or what they're willing to release to us in their budgets. So we can't really dive in to some agencies and identify that particular, which is why we then are breaking it out and showing CIP what is identifiable, operating what is identifiable, and contracts and consulting what is identifiable. Sometimes CIP is identified in a range of 3 years, sometimes it's in just for that fiscal year. So it just depends on the organization. So that's why we're comparing it for different angles, because we don't always have the specific information about the CIP and if it's going to be carried over 3 years versus 1 year.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I think it's important just to be looking at both, because I don't know, Hassan, would you say that other than Los Angeles, there's nobody who's spending anywhere near the kind of money on capital projects that we are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that on an operating basis you're going to have those. You understand?
I understand, which is why we pulled it out and are looking, but we only have what we have as far as information around what they call a capital improvement project budget.
Sure.
So that's all we have to use. But if anything, it only supports that we would need more staff versus less, because we are much larger in capital improvement budgets than most. But we are comparing ourselves even to SCAG. And there's a comparison to be had there. But we definitely, at this point, are far beneath our needs, of course. But even with the additional positions that I'll be requesting next month, we still won't be anywhere near the average even. But we do a, as we add what we'll get to in dollar oversight per auditor responsibility, which is how we break it out.
I guess, I mean, we'll get back to it when you, after you've done the analysis. It just strikes me that there's some risk of kind of, if you're looking at dollar value per contract, the processes and controls around a bigger dollar contract by itself may not necessarily demand more staff because the processes and controls are what they are almost regardless of the size of the contract.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what I'm just suggesting.
But then that would be consistent with any contract, with any organization.
Sure, right.
So that's where, you know, you have to take what you have and do an analysis there. Because we couldn't go into every organization and identify, well, how big is your contract for this versus getting into that comparison. But at least it's, I mean, we're using a needs assessment that is typically used in all audit shops when they're trying to support the responsibility of dollar oversight needed per auditor.
So Mary, are you looking at any other kind of benchmarking studies that have been done by other auditing groups like the Institute of Internal Audit? They do a benchmark. Alga, I believe, does a benchmark.
Right.
Are you
Yeah, and it's the same methodology as most use. It's a needs assessment, and they usually base it on auditor oversight per dollar responsibility. I mean, it's really the only way you can do it using similar organizations. We do bring in some pies and some graphs where we're kind of slicing it in different ways so you can look at it. But I mean, once we bring it in and it's analyzed, we're always open for suggestions of, hey, can we look at it this way, or can we go further and consider this? This is just a starting point for us, and if it needs to be tweaked, we're definitely, you know, able to do that.
You know, the only reason I asked that is, I know like specifically with the Institute of Internal Auditors, I use the benchmark, and it's a much broader base, if you will, so it's across the entire country. Still focuses on government agencies.
Right.
So that's why I asked.
Right, and they bring in risk and inherent risk and all that other stuff, and definitely, I mean, we can discuss and bring in inherent risk if we need to add that to it, either now or at a later point when the risk assessment is complete. But I'm open to that. I mean, that wouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Any more questions? Thanks for the report. Appreciate it. All right, next is Office of the Independent Performance Auditor, transfer of internal audit positions. And a 2020 budget amendment.
Yes. So this is just basically, we had moved the office, the internal audit office up under OPA, the Office of Independent Performance Auditors, in September. The position now that was currently held remained and was moved to an analyst position, but that individual has vacated that position. So now we're just basically moving that position that was in that office up on a more formal basis through the audit committee, and then it will go to consent on the board of directors in the February meeting, I believe.
So this one, just so we heard, and Mary and I had a discussion. So we used to have Steve, who retired, and we have a part-time Vinny. So because they were doing audit, so the agreement is they go to Vinny with the understanding that some of the work they used to do is management analysis, with the understanding that we still can access those employees to do the management analysis, but they will be reported.
Is this a revenue neutral move, or?
Well, the position really should be still being covered under SANDAG because it was the internal audit position that came before the IPA's office came. So that's an established position that's just moving that office and the position up.
And the color of money is going to change because I think we pay mostly the function of the audit from the general funds, the dues mainly. In the past, we used to pay from different sources. So the city dues are going to be the source mainly, not only, but mainly the one that pays for it.
But it's overall revenue neutral.
Yeah, well, revenue neutral for now, but my chief deputies and I, two of them are here. We're actually talking about an overall reduction in the payroll staff. And so for now, it's revenue neutral because they're just moving from management to the office.
So I guess the better question would be, it's the same number of FTEs.
Same number of FTEs.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it is.
Okay,
It is.
perfect. All right, gentlemen, questions?
I have one question, Mary. So if I understand Hassan and you, as far as these positions moving up, they're going to do internal audits as well as some management
But
analysis.
it's still under her purview.
Is it still
Right,
under
and
her?
when a management analysis is like non-audit consulting, that is.
Because that was going to be my
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
And Mr. Mary is, okay, how does that impact independence and objectivity?
Right. Yeah, it will definitely be the request, unless it's an audit. Now, Hassan can come to me and say, I want an audit done, then it's gonna be an audit, treated as an audit. But he can come to us and say, can you do this analysis from an audit perspective? And that would be a non-audit service that we would still independently do, but we would perform on his behalf.
And I'll still go through Mary to do that.
Yeah.
Either it's an audit or an independent. But Steve and Renee used to do this, look into this kind of thing. So that will move.
All right, then.
On that,
So
I
we
think
need to
we
vote
need a
on this?
motion and a
Right.
second.
So I'd like to make a motion then
A second.
to recommend, well, as written in our report, so, yeah. Okay, moved and seconded, please vote.
Thank you.
All right, then, audit committee membership selection procedures.
All right, well, that's mine. So over the course of the last few meetings, we've heard some feedback from you that you would be interested in an opportunity to discuss some issues related to the way in which audit committee members are selected, the way in which the chair and vice chair are selected, and anything that's really relating to the composition of the audit committee itself. And so we agendized this item for you so that you would have the freedom to do that under the Brown Act. And the board policy 39 is attached to your agenda materials for your reference. The report that was included with the item is just a brief summary of the status of board policy 39 right now, just to sort of frame the conversation. Just as a reminder, if the audit committee is interested in proposing any changes to the way in which members are selected or any of the procedures that we follow here, it would require an amendment to board policy 39, which, as I mentioned earlier today, goes through a review with the SANDAG executive committee and then requires approval by the SANDAG board.
Can I ask a question? Oh, go ahead, sir.
Well,
No, my question was, and I know we discussed it when I just started, is it policy 39 that spelled out that the chair will be an elected official and the vice chair has to be, or what's the policy?
Well, Hassan's kicking it off for us, because that was one of the items that we had heard from you several times and wanted to discuss today. And one of those, and that was precisely the issue, is how are the chair and vice chair of this committee selected, and what does board policy 39 or any other SANDAG policies require? And so the existing board policy 39 does not require that the chair or the vice chair hold a particular position. It can be both elected officials or public members or any combination thereof. It just happens to be that the current composition is both elected officials.
so very much related to Hassan's question, my question was going to be, what was missing for me here, and maybe you can address this just really off the top of your head, is where AB 805 ends in this regard. And so in other words, what's board policy versus what's mandated by the state law?
Absolutely. And so AB 805, as far as the composition of this committee is concerned, it's very simple. It states that there must be there are 5 members, 2 of them are elected officials, and 3 of them are public members. And beyond that, AB 805 does not give us very much guidance as to how how the audit committee functions in its day-to-day practices. So,
Just in normal circumstances, a board policy versus the law comes, you have to comply with the state law.
Right.
Board policies have to change to be consistent with the state law.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the
Right.
topics, as I think you covered most of the
Right.
ones that have come up to date, that we don't have to necessarily go back to the state legislature to change these things, but rather these are board policy issues.
yes, this would relate, unless there's some very, very extreme suggestions from the floor, this would relate mostly to just ways in which we could potentially propose revisions to board policy.
So if I could, I would just throw out as a question whether this might be done in a subcommittee process as opposed to this process, just because it seems to me that there are quite a number of things. I don't know how much time people have, but there's actually a lot to discuss, at least based, and Robert and I were talking before the meeting in terms of his experience, but in terms of my experience on a couple of the other analogous boards, there are a number of things not having to do with composition as much, but particularly like with terms, staggering, things of that nature, which I think would enhance the effectiveness of the committee and the public member participation, but they may be lengthy discussions, so it's a question of...
Certainly, and that's absolutely a possibility. We've agendized this very generally to give you the freedom to have those conversations. You would absolutely have an opportunity, if the committee wishes, to form a subcommittee to vet some of those issues and come back with recommendations to the audit committee. If that's the direction you would like to go, we could discuss them openly with whatever issues you would like. It's certainly whatever the direction of the committee is.
Well, speaking on what we have served on some subcommittees that have been created here, I think that's actually a good idea, is to have a subcommittee that would kind of go over some of these issues and then bring it back to the committee and let the overall committee discuss those and make the decision, as opposed to maybe taking time.
So I'm just curious, how is the chair and vice chair, they're appointed or elected by the committee?
No, the chair and vice chair of this committee are appointed by the chair of the SANDAG Board of Directors.
Just by way of a little bit of history,
Yeah.
and somebody jump in if I'm not reviewing the history appropriately. I think when the committee, and this was a new thing, right? When the committee started, the board chair chose two members from the board as the chair and vice chair. I think each of us as public members may have had a little bit of an expectation that there would be a split, that the chair would be perhaps a board member, but that the vice chair would be a public member. Partly, and I'll say this to me personally, I kind of thought that was the spirit of the intent of AB 805 in terms of bringing in the public oversight. Functionally, it hasn't made a huge amount of difference because the principal, I guess, role at least of other committees in terms of board and vice chair is agenda setting, but there's been complete openness to suggestions from an agenda setting point of view. So functionally it hasn't been a big deal, but and then I know Paul had some conversations, I think with John about this, so went back to the board a second time, and so the way that where it's come down is that the policy is written that there's no prohibition, or in effect, as Amberlynn had described, that it could be either, but the practice to date has been the way it is.
But even the policy said no prohibition. If the chair appoints, that's a prohibition by itself.
Well, the chair has the freedom to appoint a public member.
Correct, yes.
Chair of the board
Chair
of
of
SANDAG.
Yeah, but my point, if the chair appoints, that in a way restrict the ability to the committee have a say in their chair and vice chair. I mean, I don't really care for 805 per se, but in general, usually if you have a committee you want it to be independent, they should have some determination over the destiny of who's going to chair and vice chair. Do you agree, Mr. Mayor? I asked you at the wrong time. Sorry.
I don't feel strongly about it either way. I think historically, Sandag has had the chair appoint elected members to chair all the committees.
And that's part of board policy. So Sandag board policy gives the chair that authority for all Sandag PACs.
And I understand totally for all, not for this committee,
So
because of the oversight.
I doubt there'd be any objection to it. I think it's just one of those things that's always been done that way and nobody even thought of.
Well, my recollection of this has been discussed a couple of times. My recollection is that Chair Weber didn't have a problem with it and may have brought it back to board chair, but it didn't seem to get a.
I don't think the board chair wanted to change it.
And if I could possibly clarify that. So annually, Sandag does board policy updates. During the last round, it would have been in the late 2018, early 2019 timeframe, the suggestion was made to the executive committee to revise board policy 39 to effectuate exactly what you're talking about, and they declined to do it at that time. That doesn't prohibit the audit committee from making an additional request to do it again, but that is the history on that. It was considered and it was not approved.
And I actually had a conversation 2 days ago. Bill Baber and I met, and he is allowing me to express that he is completely okay with whatever the decision is here, both in regard to chair, vice chair, and staggering the terms. So he was very comfortable and he even further said if he needs to write a letter to the supporting that change to the chair of the board, that he would be willing and comfortable to do that as well, that he was comfortable with either the chair or vice chair, anyone, elected or a public, and also staggering the terms.
Can I make a suggestion? Just whatever you decide, all of you or the subcommittee, you just make a recommendation what you think it should be. We'll take it to the.
Here's a question. Is there a way to change the policy just based on this committee, or does it have to be a sweeping change across all the committees?
We would. Most of what you're talking about would be just a change to board policy 39, which impacts this committee. Anything beyond what we've been discussing may require additional changes, but from what I'm hearing, my sense is that it would not require changes to any other board policies.
I've served on a couple of other committees, and this is a fundamentally different kind of committee. The whole purpose of this committee is to have transparency and to get other eyes and other authority behind what we're doing here. So I think it would be a good thing for the public to see that we had leadership from the community and not just because it takes away the whole concept of rubber stamping. And so I'm fine with that. I think however you recommend best to recommend to executive committee.
I think you should put the package together and we'll take it to the executive committee with the account, especially if Mr. Pepper and the Mayor Wells are willing to support that.
Yeah, I know Bill Baber would be comfortable with it, and I certainly am.
So then I think the question remains if that's certainly a change that we can propose, that I can make those edits to the board policy to reflect that either the chair or the vice chair must be a public member, or I can bring that back to you for your review if you would like to see it, or we could, if there's still interest in creating a subcommittee to vet that issue and any others, we can roll those into the same process.
Do we want it to be a must or a may?
I think may.
Well, right now it's a May.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It is.
Right now is a May. Right now.
I
it's
thought
a
you
May.
stated very eloquently the rationale, really, the key rationale for why one would want to do this. Frankly, I was a little surprised as a board of elected officials that they wouldn't have seen it exactly the way you described it as politically the right thing to do.
I think at the time, nobody really had any clear concept of what this committee was going to be doing. They didn't know you guys. Steve came to me and said, would you be willing to do this? And there was very little discussion about what this was going to entail. So I think next time we go back, there'll be a kind of, and if Mr. Baber and I go and present the case to the executive committee, I don't think there'll be any objections.
It's a done deal, yeah, if the two.
So when you say must or may,
It has to be a must because now it's May.
So what would the must be? You must do what?
Meaning you have to have, I'm sorry, you have to have at least one be a public member. You have to.
In
It
the
can't be-
in the chair and vice chair.
Right.
And then you stagger those positions so that
Yeah.
even if that person got the vice chair committee, they eventually within a year or two would be moved to chair. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But just to answer your question, I think that's a little bit of an easy one. It sounds like we generally have a sense of consensus. I think, I would guess, but others may have different point of view, that the concept of staggered public member terms would generally be viewed as something that would enhance the effectiveness.
Yeah.
But actually coming up with that formula can start to get a little tricky, because I think it then backs into the term limit question, which is somewhat of a different question, but it's also related to the effectiveness of the committee. And as we were talking in my own experience, with respect to whoever designed it for the reasons they designed it, I just think 2 years really for a committee of this nature is really actually almost impairs the effectiveness of the committee, because it just takes such a long time to get up to speed. But then it also, again, does dovetail into the question of staggering terms. So whether that can all get dealt with at once right now is a little bit more of a question in my mind. But
We're talking about 2-year terms, but are there term limits?
there's both.
Right now.
So
it's
currently, each term is for both public and board members. The term is for 2 years, and you can serve 2 terms. So that's how it's currently set forth. There's certainly, if there's a preference to increase or decrease those terms, we could certainly discuss that. Staggering is a slightly different issue, because the idea behind staggering is that people are beginning and ending their terms at different times, and so there's a few ways to approach that. One is sort of the organic way, which is that naturally happens over time as people maybe do not fulfill a full term, or as elected officials may no longer hold a position on the board that makes them eligible to be on this committee. So there is, the possibility that result could organically come over time.
God forbid.
I know, I hesitate to say that, but it is a possibility.
We've seen it happen a few times that way.
Another option could be the proposed language to board policy, which could potentially give the SANDAG chair, the board chair, the authority to extend any term for an additional year in order to create a staggering or to ensure continuity of some kind. That could be an option as well. And then, of course, whatever options you'd like to suggest from the floor. All are possibilities.
I like the concept of having a year or 2-year terms, because I've had some people on committees that I've appointed that seem so rational when you appointed them, and then they lose that rationality after a while. But on the other hand, I don't like term limits. I think if somebody's doing a good job and they want to stay and they've got the institutional knowledge, and everybody thinks they should stay, then I don't see there's anything wrong with people serving 3, 4, 5 terms. So.
And on the audit committee that I experienced at YOLO, we just came into a new committee, and that was one of the issues too. So it was initially 2-year terms, and they were not staggered. So they did just what you recommended, and that was, they made it 3-year terms. There was no term limit, because most people who wanted to be there were there for a good reason. And they ended up adding a year to stagger it out, to create that staggered term.
I know for, at the port, and when we were developing the audit committee, at the port, it's the external public members serve a 3-year term, and there's no term limits. For board members, it's a 1-year term. That's just how they work there. Seemed to work well. They were staggered, but again, it's kind of like Amber Lynn had, it was more organic. The policy simply said this is staggered terms, but again, there was an administrative process to make sure that they stayed that way. My feeling is kind of with Stuart, 2 years seemed to be a bit short as an public audit committee member anyway. At least for me, when I stepped in, my first year was pretty much just learning what SANDAG does and kind of all their operations and asking a lot of really dumb questions and things like that. At the port, we had 3-year terms. We never really had a problem having candidates come in. We didn't get a lot of candidates, but the candidates we did get were those that really wanted to serve and knew kind of what the length of time is in commitment is going to be. So I don't know, that's kind of my thoughts. Again, as far as board members, at the port it was 1 year.
Yeah, just for clarification, the policy for board members, for SANDAG board members, elected official members of this committee, and the public members could be different, arguably, right? There's nothing, it could be whatever.
Yes, it just happens to be the same.
If you remove the term limits, wouldn't it kind of create a staggering effect eventually anyways? As far as worrying about if everyone was new and everyone was old, you wouldn't typically have if there were no term limits.
No.
Everyone leaving at the same time.
At the port, for instance,
But they're going
everybody had a date when they started. And so each year, since I was kind of overseeing or supporting the audit committee, I would look at those dates. And as it got closer to the end of that first term, I'm going to that public member and saying, okay, would you like to serve? Do you not?
Right.
Sometimes they say, yeah, we'll serve another term. Other times, they're not. And so that would tell me, okay, at that point, I'm going to start.
I agree with the mayor. I mean, I think part of the problem we have in the second committee was the two sides will work together is 10 minutes. I do think they should be 10 minutes. Having said that, I think the staggering in your argument is for public members should be more than 2 years, and I agree because it takes a while. Actually, at SCAG, it's a 1 year term for elected officials, and it's very short. But
Just a couple of thoughts. One is, I think, I'm not a fan of term limits either. I think, you probably more often lose good people from term limits as you do, get rid of less than desirable ones. But, purely from an audit perspective, there definitely is a bit of a fresh eyes value in having at least some turnover. But Mary, I would guess you're right, is that, or Representative Lynn, you'd inherently have at some point in time, some people, they're not going to spend their lifetimes on this thing, right?
And not everybody's going to be done at the same, want to be done at the same
exactly.
time.
So the term limit thing could be a way to address the staggering if people want to go in that direction. But I think, just by way of example, the city of San Diego has 4-year terms. They have had a bit of a recruitment challenge. I'm not sure it's the 4 years per se, but just maybe the nature of these things. And with ITOC, we spent a lot of time with ITOC going through the term question and trying to get to staggering and whatnot. So there are lots of ways to get to it. One thing that I think, and I may have missed it, that may be silent in the board policy, but I would suggest including is the notion that a member can, if there are term limits, that a member can continue to serve until the chair is filled. I don't know if that's currently in.
So we do, I neglected to mention that part. We have what we call a hedge in our policy, which says that no member may serve more than 5 years. And so that gives you that 1 year wiggle room in case the appointments don't perfectly line up.
Yeah. But, and obviously that would go away if people decided to eliminate term limits.
Yes.
So I don't know if that
So
makes
is that
it easy to
enough
reach a
for you
consensus.
for her to formulate something and take the bill on
Look, probably haven't given enough direction. I think we're all in agreement that term limits are not needed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to
All
it.
right, so let's put that in. I'm comfortable with changing the elected officials' term to 1 year. If that's what's being done in other boards, I don't think that's a problem. Bill and I are not going to make huge changes to the way audits are done. We don't know nothing about audits, so we're just. I think 1 year is fine if that's.
Well, Mayor, to kind of speak to something that I had done kind of an analysis, if you will, when we were creating our audit committee, looking at other agencies here in the region, outside of the region, and it's pretty common for board members to serve 1 year, and they usually rotate out after 1 year. Public members, it's a little different, usually around 3 to, I saw some at 5 years, which I think is a little too long. So I would be in agreement. I mean, before it was 1 year, and they just simply rotated out. I'm okay with 2.
So you're okay with putting a year for elected officials, 5 years for public?
Yeah, because I think that solves a couple problems. One of those problems is the staggering issue, and
I think that's good, so make that part of that.
Well,
I'm
yeah,
glad for 3 and
if
5.
we're actually going to try to create a proposal, totally separate it from the board member, which I leave to you and speaking for Bill and in his absence. But with regard to public members, I think then eliminating term limits. I would though still change the 2 years to at least a 3-year. Partly because, you know what, if somebody is dissuaded from wanting to serve because they're not willing to commit to 5.
I mean, we're saying 5.
Well, 5 personally, I don't know, that I think may be a little.
Maximum of 5, because most members probably won't want to.
Well, the maximum of 5 was if you had term limits, but you don't.
Right, so if we're eliminating term limits,
Right.
but you still have to have an initial term.
the legislature's committed to reducing sentences, though. So they
I don't know. I mean, I think there is some possibility you might start getting implications for recruitment if you go to 5. I think, though, the 2 should be at minimum 3, and I would even argue 4, but because it does take a while for somebody to get up to speed, and just 2 years just is way too short. But.
And that's sort of the concern that I have with the elected officials only being there 1 year versus 2.
You have to train them all.
Is getting them up to speed.
Well, so
it's kind of like before you blink, they're gone. So you've gotten them comfortable, and then before you blink, they're gone.
Couldn't we do it where you have a 1-year term, and then you can extend it and do another year if asked? If the chair wants you to, if at the end of that year the chair says, do you like audit committee, you want to stay on audit committee, we'd like you to, then.
Or is there logic, and I'm not a public official or board member, so I should probably not even say this, but is there any logic to the notion that, to address Mary's point, that the public officials not be new members of the SANDAC board? In other words, that you've had at least a year on the board before coming on here?
And so there are some prerequisites for the board members, and
okay.
it gets exactly to that point.
Okay.
And if I could just reference it, the board members need to have served on the board for at least 3 years, have a basic understanding of the audit committee, and express a willingness to work through the audit committee to pursue opportunities for improvements in operations, financial reporting, and internal control. So there are some minimum requirements for board members that already exist in board policy.
So Mary, are you suggesting that we move their term to 3 years, keep our term at 2 years, and we still have that staggering effect?
I mean, if Mary had a wish list,
Yeah,
I would say for the elected officials, definitely not less than 2, and I think 4 years is a really good term for public members that are willing to commit, because it's not always easy to get public members to commit for a 4-year term and be that committed. I think, it's not easy to find.
I'm comfortable with that, Joe Miller.
I'd be fine with that.
That's the way it's going to be.
So with that gives me plenty of direction, and with the committee's permission, I will make the appropriate edits to board policy and bring it back to you at your next meeting so you can take a look at it, ensure that it meets your expectations. If it does, then we can move that forward with a request to the executive.
Mayor Walls and Mayor Pepper will take it to the executive committee. They will be sitting in those chairs presenting to their colleagues.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually on the executive committee, so that'll work out.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, I appreciate your feedback.
No, that was quick.
I think that's the end of that. And then
Did
we
you have more questions?
No, not at all. I think that was amazing that we got through all that. Good work.
How about a continued public comment? Was there anybody?
No further comments, sir?
Then I say we are adjourned.
See, that's why I said it's a very interesting discussion, much more interesting than my one.